Hello once again. It's good to see everybody. We should be able to make it through John 9 and get some introductory into John 10, but that does depend on if anybody else has any extra comments or questions about what we discussed last week in John 9:31. And we know that God heareth not sinners, but if any man be a worshiper of God and doeth his will, he may hear it. So here's your chance for final comment on that. All right, not seeing you. What?
I missed it last week.
Oh, yeah?
I went to your sermon, but I forgot about class.
Yeah.
No.
Oh, you're just out of luck.
What is going on?
All right. Then we will press forward. As we're going through our study of John and what he is recording for us by divine revelation is that very, very element. John is the revealer. He is revealing to us who God is. And if we think about this from the standpoint of how it was that they viewed God under the Old Testament system, what were they given? How was everything seen?
Visions?
Okay, but are we getting full visions?
No, it's what's to come.
Okay.
So it's partial until in Ephesians where Paul says that the whole it's complete.
Mm-hmm. But then you have the description of how it was under the Old Testament system.
Partial.
Huh?
Partial.
Partial, but they're specific terms.
She said shadows.
Okay. Types and shadows. Just say it loud, Rachel. Types and shadows. So you take, for example, the temple. And that is a type of what is coming under the New Testament system, which is the church. And that the church, that temple, is not anything physical, it's not anything material, it's not any set location, but it's us, the Levitical priesthood. That's a type and shadow, once again, of the church. The sacrifices that they offered and the killing of a lamb. That's a type and a shadow of what's coming with the one true sacrifice, which is Christ. So throughout Israel's history, they've been seeing, or they should have been seeing these things as, okay, here are these elements that are shown to us, leading us up to Galatians chapter 3. The law was a schoolmaster, literally a tutor, but more literal than that is like it is the school bus. This is the thing that's trying to transport us to where we're wanting to be. So these elements that we have are not the actual things. But now, with Christ, Jesus, the Son of God, being on earth, we have the actual thing. And that with God under the Old Testament system, to some degree you have God at a distance. Now I say to some degree, because, and we've talked about this before, but we're just refreshing ourselves. Under the Old Testament system with the tabernacle and the temple, how close could your common everyday person get to God?
You had to bring it before the priest.
Okay?
So you weren't able to go into the
Holy of Holies.
Huh?
Holy of Holies.
All right, there's the Holy of Holies, most holy place, but what's before that?
holy place.
The holy place. Could you get in there?
No.
No. So the only ones that could go before God on your behalf were the priests. And then to go beyond that to where the actual mercy, I want to say where the actual mercy seat is, there again, types and shadows. The figure of the mercy seat being the Ark of the Covenant and the top in between the two cherubims, only the high priest could go in there, and he went in there once a year. But now what do we have under the Old Testament system? Or excuse me, the New Testament system? It's direct access. That veil has been torn to where the Hebrew writer says that we can boldly go before the throne of God. And thus, when we're thinking about Jesus being here on earth at this time, and how he is already presenting and showing before his audience how much better the system is going to be if they would follow him. Yes, that Old Testament system was glorious, but it does not compare to what is now under this New Testament, this new covenant that Christ establishes, and that you are right here with God, and it's everybody. And with the illustration we have in this chapter, we're being shown just how far it goes to what we mean about anybody. Here is this man born blind who's been set aside by society, cast aside, looked down upon, and this is the one that God is taking interest in. So that when we continue in our studies and we're looking at the miracles that are being done, and John records them as being signs, because signs point to something. And the unique nature of this miracle, the sign that's being performed. And even the blind man, he acknowledges this. Since the world began, was it not heard that any man opened the eyes of one that was born blind? Now, up to this point, Jesus has cured all kinds of blindness. Making the lame to be able to walk again, those that are mute, not able to speak, allows them to be able to speak. Those that are deaf, brings about their hearing. But then this is being, the ante is being upped, if you will, on this effort. And with the unique nature of this miracle that's being performed, it produces a confidence with this man that he's not willing to back down. If this man were not of God, he could do nothing. So we have a two-part argument with a conclusion. Okay, you say that he's a sinner. Well, if he's a sinner, then God wouldn't hear what it is that he's requesting. And then, point number two of his argument, since the world began, was it not heard that anyone opened the eyes of one that was born blind? The conclusion, if this man were not of God, he could do nothing. Excuse me. Jesus is divine. And there's no getting around it with this kind of healing that's been done. And so it is only reasonable, it's only logical that the conclusion would be reached as it is in verse 33. He has to be of God. And we keep going back to John 3, Nicodemus. That's what Nicodemus said. All right. No man can do these things except God be with him. So here's this lowly man able to reason better than these religious elites. And it's not because of his education level. It's simply because he is an honest person. And that if we are going to reach proper conclusions from what God is trying to teach, you first have to be honest. And the only way to reach that is, well, I just want to simply do what God says. Even if it condemns me. Even if it ends up pointing out to me, oh, here's something that I shouldn't be doing, I'm not going to try to ignore that. Or explain it away or try to reason it away. If this is what it says, then it's what it says. But in the next verse, we're going to be shown how people will deal with facts. And especially facts that they do not like. They, the Pharisees, answered and said unto him, Thou wast altogether born in sins, and dost thou teach us? And they cast him out. Rather than admit that they are wrong, they avoid and dodge. Now here they are, and they're arguing the exact same way that the disciples were earlier. How does this chapter start?
Them questioning at the man in sin.
Who's the them?
Was it the disciples?
Yeah. Jesus leaves them in the temple because they're wanting to stone him. And as he's leaving, comes across this blind man. And we made mention of with the disciples, instead of asking Jesus, well, are you going to heal him? Are you going to take care of him? They automatically jump into the same line of questioning of, well, here's this terrible event that's happened to this man. Who's the one that's guilty of it? Who's the cause of it? Did this man sin or did his parents sin? But with their argument, it's more of what we've seen already, and that it is character assassination. Oh, well, you were born blind. That proves that you're a sinner also. Just like this man Jesus that we're trying to condemn. So you two guys are just sticking up for each other. That's not what this proves. But it's anything that they can try to grasp at, to try to lay aside what he's laid out. And then to take it a step further and saying, well, here you are, such a sinner like you are, and then you're trying to turn around and tell us something? Trying to teach us something? Now again, as we say, or as I've said sometimes, that which proves too much proves nothing at all. What's the flaw in what they're presenting here? How does this actually end up falling back on them extremely hard, that if people were listening, it's just like, well, hold on a second. It doesn't make any sense that you're now reasoning this way.
Well, I think the thing that stands out is you're born in sin, and how dare you teach us? But the concept is, even if he was a sinner, they're not offering him any hope to get out of his sin.
Right. Yep.
So,
Aside from the one scapegoat of give God the praise, and we'll let everything be. So in their sense of it, it's, well, okay, if you will recant everything that you've been stating, just, oh yeah, I made it up, whatever, then everything will be fine. So there again, it's just a further burying of what the evidence is. And that even with that, so yeah, it's still not an element of hope, because then I have to go back on what my convictions are.
well, not only that, but you're following their rules and not
Right, yeah. Absolutely. Okay. Anybody else? All right, let's think about this. Thou wast altogether born in sins, and dost thou teach us? If this is the way that you have been feeling this whole entire time, then why have you been wasting everybody's time asking this man all these questions? You've just made your entire process unnecessary. He's been a sinner this whole entire point, or this whole entire time. If that's the case, shouldn't even brought him in for inquiry. Shouldn't brought him in for investigation. You weren't going to listen to him to begin with. And thus people should have picked up on that. It's just like, wait a minute here. Now all of a sudden, like before, you're fine to listen to him because you're trying to catch him and stuff. But now, because he's actually backed you in a corner, now you're going to try to play this card of, oh, well, you're just a sinner, blah, 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 this, that, and the other. Well, then you shouldn't have been listening to him to begin with. So we're seeing that your conclusion that you're reaching is unjust. Just the further hypocrisy in what's being presented to everybody. But then to take it to the next degree of, well, here you are, you're born the sinner. Of course you don't know anything. Well, then why have you been listening to him up to this point? Why have you been willing to listen and have this investigation? Here are the Pharisees. And they are making the decision themselves to remain blind. And that because they are not willing, they could not be taught by somebody else. And somebody that they deemed as being lesser than they. And then to try to attack people. And this stuff is still going on today. This same type of behavior of having a know-it-all crowd. And it's not just a denominational problem. It's a brotherhood problem. That you have bad people, bad men that get into positions of leadership, and then anybody that they view as being beneath them comes along with an accusation and just automatically turns into, well, who are you to come and talk to me? So you just think about the actions of my family in Virginia when people tried to question them and to investigate what was going on. And the response was, who are you to question us? And even before the investigation got out, even inside, my dad was constantly berating and degrading members of the congregation that would stand up to him. And he even said to Mark directly in the 3-hour-long meeting, as Mark was answering his questions and showing that my dad didn't know what he was talking about, and the only response that my dad had towards Mark is, well, you're a novice anyways. Who are you to be speaking up? That's this attitude. Yes?
Novice.
Huh?
Novice.
Novice.
New at something.
Yeah. 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 And it's just, it's the whole idea of, well, who are you to even investigate? We know what we're doing. We're the experts here. Also, you're just automatically above everybody, and nobody can look into what you're doing. Gilbert Goff at Mount Zion, pushing sisters around and saying, you're not the judge of me. That's what the denominations say to us all the time. And we criticize them for that kind of attitude. And yet here it is being presented and used by quote-unquote respected brethren. So when we're considering this and the idea that's being presented here, well, dost thou teach us? That is a proof positive of a person's blindness. The idea that we cannot be taught by anyone is a proof that we are spiritually blind. And as we are going throughout our lives, we need to be in a position to where we can and will listen to anyone. But in listening to what they have to say, we then have to weigh that evidence. And when the evidence is weighed and there are facts that cannot be denied, then we have to be accepting of those facts. even if it does end up going against something that I've believed for a very long time. And if you're not willing to do that, you're spiritually blind. And to a large degree, again, that's what's happening to our brotherhood, is that they're not even willing to examine basic ideas of the faith, of the doctrines that we hold. And that they really have no deep understanding, no deep conviction within themselves of what it is that we teach and uphold. It just purely is tradition. They couldn't defend it. They couldn't argue it correctly. Wouldn't be able to use scriptures as they should. But then you come along and try to tell them something and they don't want to hear it. Why? Oh, because we know. Couldn't argue your way out of a wet paper bag. But yet you know so much. But they could not allow themselves to be taught, and they would not allow themselves to be taught, so what do? It's underlined in red. They cast him out. Like the Mount Zion congregation said to our sisters that are here, we all just go somewhere else. Same mentality, same type of action. Can't answer. You're caught in your sins. Well, if you just don't want to be here, then go. No, it's a thing of you cast us out. So here are these Jewish leaders, and Emmanuel, God with us, is right before them, in their very sight. They cannot see him. The fulfillment of their Old Testament scriptures playing out right in front of them. Can't see it. It's not a thing that they can't see it, it's because they choose not to see it. They don't want to see it. And here's what can happen when we are determined to have our own way. They had a preconceived idea of what the Messiah was supposed to be. Well, okay, this is what we want. Tough. That's not what God had in mind. Well, okay, we can see what God had in mind, but we still don't want that. So we're going to refuse it. We're going to reject it. And this is what happens when we do what we want rather than to know what God's will is and be guided by His Word. And it's what happens when we reach a position of knowing more than we think that we do. And that's 1 Corinthians 8:2 that we discussed when we went through that epistle together. If any man think that he knoweth anything, he knoweth nothing, yet as he ought to know. It's the ability to be able to stop and be examined. Allow yourself to be questioned. 1 Timothy 6:3-4. If any man teach otherwise and consent not to wholesome words, even the words of our Lord Jesus Christ, and to the doctrine which is according to godliness, he is proud, knowing nothing. And once again, here is the difference between the physically blind man and the spiritually blind men. The physically blind recognizes his ignorance and his problems. And we saw that when the blind man answered a question with the response of, I don't know, back in verse 12. The spiritually blind, they would recognize, if they would recognize this, something got jumbled up in my notes. The spiritually blind will not recognize this, so they're not teachable. So then they just cast him out. Well, we'll just get rid of you. And in the Hebrew letter, the Hebrew epistle that's being written to the Christians at that time, gives a reminder and a reteaching about their Israelite Hebrew history. Hebrews 3 and Hebrews 4 records the hardening of the heart connected to the deceitfulness of sin that took place in the wandering in the wilderness. He gives a really great lesson on how people are blinded. And it's because going through the wilderness, Israel was blind to their blessings. How it was that God was taking care of them. And because they were more interested in convenience, more interested in their wants, and they were not interested in their needs. And so the whole generation ended up dying in the wilderness except for 2. What this is impressing to us is how that we also need to be careful, and above all need to be honest of heart, that when facts are given to us that we cannot deny and that we cannot refute, then we need to set aside what we were thinking before and follow what the facts are. But if we're not willing to do that and continue to just stay in our ways, we're in trouble. There's something really wrong there. And this is just it's a great lesson, especially for the time frame that we live in, to where people want to lean so much on their own feelings. And so much emphasis is given over to how people feel. I don't care how a person feels when it comes to what the facts are. Facts are stubborn things, and we need to be just as stubborn. Facts don't care about your feelings. Well, that doesn't make me feel good. Can't help it. And because, and we are being shown what happens when people lean more on their feelings than what the actual facts are. Here the man is healed, and so what are we going to do about these facts? We'll cast him out. We'll get rid of him. That doesn't get rid of the facts. And in 3 chapters, we're going to study again about how this same crowd tries to get rid of facts with the raising of Lazarus. What do they try to do with Lazarus? They literally try to bury the facts. Well, Jesus raised this man from the dead. Okay, let's kill him. What do you think that's going to do? If Jesus raised him once, he could raise him again. So you're just continuing to feed a cycle. What's so funny? Oh, you're just continuing. I want to be in a joke. What is it?
Lazarus, please. Not again.
Oh, yeah. So you're just continuing to feed a cycle that you yourself are playing into, to where Jesus is being glorified. Why not just submit? You've been beaten. Why not just give in? People are hard-headed. That's all there is to it. These facts, these truths, these things do not go away no matter what you try to do to them. Cast the man out, character assassination, and even to the final degree of trying to kill him. Do whatever you want to me. It does not change the truth. And the truth is all we have. If we don't have truth and facts, there's no confidence in anything that we would try to promote. So there we have man's side of things in dealing with this blind man and the miracle that's been performed on him, and specifically spent a lot of time discussing the Pharisees. But now we'll get to transition. And now we'll get to see God's reaction to this man. And there again, we have a lesson being presented to us on how it is that man will treat us for trying to stand up for what his truth is. And yet, even with how man will treat us doesn't matter, doesn't compare with how it is that God is going to treat us when we do what's right. So John 9:35. Jesus heard that they had cast him out. And when he had found him, he said unto him, Dost thou believe on the Son of God? Here's this man been cast out of fellowship wrongly for upholding and standing for the truth. And they are living up to their threats. That's what the parents were afraid of. Well, if any man confesses Jesus, you'll be cast out of the synagogue. Okay, they're not bluffing. And while man is casting him out, Jesus goes looking for him. And he found him. And that really is a beautiful picture that needs to be cemented into our brains as to how God feels about us. And it really is an unbelievable point that here's the Son of God, the very creator of this planet, and he's here walking amongst his creation. Just think about all the things that God could be doing. But instead of doing any of that, he takes the time to go hunt for this person. And that's what he's willing to do for all of us. Even while society and the rest of our community and the rest of the world, for that matter, would cast us out, turn their backs on us, if we're following God's truth, if we're upholding what he says, well, then when they cast us out, he'll come and find us. Here's a man rejected as being unworthy of fellowship just because this group happens to say so. But Jesus shows again the ones that he desires to hold in fellowship with him. And it's the ones that are rejected by others. And it's the ones that will follow God by faith. And thus we have been shown once again, here's another element of the man's faith growing. A question is presented to the man. Dost thou believe on the Son of God? Started out, well, it's just a man, Jesus, that healed me. Then the defense grew to being, well, he's a prophet. Now it's been laid before him even greater than that. Do you believe he's the Son of God? And here is what the followers of Jesus had to settle in their minds at this time. And this is what kept many of the Jews from being converted and having their sins forgiven. Okay, yeah, he's a good man. Yeah, he's a prophet. Son of God? Messiah? Sure. Son of God? Deity? And then once more, we have presented to us the honesty of this man. The question's laid out. Dost thou believe on the Son of God? He answered and said, Who is he? That I might believe on him. He needs more evidence. Again, he answers, I don't know. Show me. Tell me. And I will. Now just think how much better and how much easier evangelism would be if we met more people like this. To where when we come and we ask them about, well, what do you know about baptism? Most people have not studied in any degree these different elements. They're just simply going off of what they've been told. And when we think about people today contrasted to the people back here, people today are not nearly as knowledgeable of the Bible as they were during this time. But the same problem is being faced all the way around. It comes back to pride. People are too proud and a large degree too blind of their own lack of understanding to admit it. And so they continue to be lost because they won't allow themselves to be taught. For a brief moment, when you're interacting with them, they'll feel their shame of not knowing. Because everybody feels it. Somebody comes along and asks you something, especially in an area where you should know it. So somebody comes along asking you something about contracting or building cabinets or doing electrical work. And it's just, well, hey, do you know about this? And if you don't know, is there not an immediate bit of tinge inside of you? It's like, well, do I admit that I don't, or do I try to make something up like I do? You make something up.
Nobody understands what electrical is.
That's true. So,
Black magic, so I can just know
all right.
this.
The desire is, well, I don't want to look stupid, so foolish. So let me just act like I know. Well, that ends up making you look worse than if you would just go ahead and say, I don't know. And that's what people do when it comes to religion and the Bible. Instead of humbling themselves and going ahead and admitting and saying, well, no, I actually don't know, they try to kick back. And they try to go off of something that they've heard from, TikTok or shorts on Instagram without actually going into any real depth of their study. And they just stay blind. There's nothing wrong with saying, I don't know, and you know what? Give me some more information. Give me some more evidence. And Jesus is going to do that for him. You got a thought? Okay. Now, before we go to the evidence that Jesus lays out, chase a quick rabbit here. He answered and said, Who is he? Did anybody take note of that word? No. Anybody take the time to consider that here the blind, or this man, calls him Lord before he even knows who he is? This is Acts 9 and Saul on the road to Damascus. And you have those in the denominations around us that would try to argue against baptism being essential for salvation. And they would say that Paul was saved on the road to Damascus because he called Jesus Lord. That doesn't prove anything. Because here's this man, has no idea who Jesus is. Remember, he did not see him. Just knows some man, Jesus did it. He's a prophet. Now he's being told, well, you got to believe in the Son of God. Calls him Lord. Okay, blind men must have been saved right here. Is that how salvation works? Is that how faith operates? And even for that matter, the man's not even repented yet. He's not even put his faith in Jesus yet. Because he's not been shown who the Son of God is. So if you're in discussion with somebody in Acts 9, attach John 9 into your notes. So verse 37, Jesus said unto him, Thou hast both seen him, and is he that talketh with thee. And he, the man, said, Lord, I believe. And he worshipped him. We've been emphasizing also throughout our study the importance of Jesus' words along with the miracle. The miracle without the words of Jesus would not have saved this man. He would have been healed, would have been able to see, but had Jesus not found him and brought more information, more teaching, and more instruction, that man still would have been in his sins. We have the word of Christ being the final element, the final thing, so as to produce faith, which saves. Now, what's also important about this section is what's underlined in verse 38, that you have the man saying, Lord, I believe, and then he worshipped him. It's amazing how that you can come across passages like this and still have sections out there in quote-unquote Christianity that will make the claim, well, Jesus never made any such claim of himself actually being God. You have those. Now, you also have Muslims. They make arguments like that. Yes, Jesus was a good man, Jesus was a prophet, but never was God. And they even go so far as, I've heard one individual actually make the argument that Jesus was never worshipped. Well, there's a problem right here. Jesus was worshipped. And for anybody that would say, well, Jesus never was on the same level or plane as God the Father, again, you have an issue here. Because who is the only one that is worthy of worship? It's God. And that's the problem that the Jews had.
Remember Jesus telling the devil, worship God. Well,
Right.
Yeah. He said yes to himself. And here he is accepting worship.
Yeah. And the Pharisees are not going to do this. But yet here is the immediate reaction of this man when the evidence is given to him. He believes and he worships without any argument, without any quibble, without any kind of pushback. Because the evidence is clear. You can't argue with this kind of stuff. And with all the signs that the Pharisees and others had seen and the sermons that they had heard preached by Jesus after those miracles. And that's one of the major differences about John's writing of the life of Christ, is that when these miracles and these signs are performed, we have the sermons that are presented after Jesus does it. And that all of this is designed so as to help them to realize for them to see what the blind man could see. All right, this is the Son of God. And he is to be believed, and he is to be worshiped. This is, in fact, God in the flesh. And when the blind man does this, Jesus has a response. Jesus has more to say on this matter. Jesus said, "For judgment I am come into this world, that they which see not might see, and that they which see might be made blind." Sounds pretty strange. Especially when you consider that we've already learned in John 3 that Jesus says there to Nicodemus that he was not come into the world to judge the world. So again, is this contradiction? Or is there something that we're needing to take into consideration? All right, what do we need to take into consideration?
I don't know. Humble enough to say.
Huh?
And I'm humble enough to say.
Well, we'll give you a badge before you leave.
Is it the difference in you're the leader? Or, no, I guess that wouldn't be, never mind.
I don't know. Don't know where you're going.
I was going to say, because, well, it wouldn't fit, because he's telling Nicodemus, I'm not coming to judge.
Mhm.
I was thinking the opposite, where I'm coming because he would have been a leader, and this would be some man basically laying on his belly, or laying on his back. Old Smith
Mhm.
to Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
So is he talking about the Pharisees and casting judgment on those who do not uphold the law?
Yeah.
But contrast what he said
Yeah.
to Nicodemus.
Yeah.
So we allowed to skip ahead, chapter
It-
12.
Yeah.
So it's his words that are going to judge us by, so that's him coming into the world. The standard that's going to judge him. It's that other half of it that I don't know how to explain to people because it messes it up.
Okay.
Because God is judging based on his judgment, or based on his standard that he sets that would contrast the two.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the argument that throws me off.
Okay.
John's account, he says he didn't come.
Gotta say it louder.
In John's, with Nicodemus, he says he didn't come to condemn the world, so he's not condemning in sin that condemns, he's just bringing judgment.
But right before that, Rachel, in addition to what Rachel is saying, right before that, he's talking about those who believe. So they're not going to be condemned.
Okay.
I need everyone to be louder.
Run it back. You got freezers and air conditioners. Go.
When Jesus is talking to Nicodemus, he says he's not coming to condemn the world. So it's sin that condemns, it's not Jesus that's condemning. Jesus is just there to judge the sin that's condemning.
And then Mom said,
Then I said that right before that is
Louder.
for who, it's 3:16, so it's the believers. So they're not going to be condemned because they're believing, and that's what he's saying, that they can be saved. Well, not just believing, but being obedient to him. And then in this context, it's different, and so, yeah, I don't have a conclusion.
But what's being said here in John 9, Jesus has already said twice, 3 times in John 8? No, that he is come to judge, that he will judge. So we've already dealt with this before. Just need to remember. But it's good because you'll have people that will run to John 3 and it's like, you see there, Jesus, he's not coming to condemn. And thus they try to remove all condemnation out of the picture. Well, okay, you've got to make this coincide. You've got to make this mesh with what Jesus says here. And he says, for judgment I am coming to this world. What's the mission?
To save.
Okay, that goes back to Matthew 1. His name should be called Emmanuel, which is interpreted God with us. And what is it that God is going to do with us? He shall save Israel from their sin. What is it that we have said about God and what his desire is?
That all man shall be saved.
That all men should repent and come to salvation. Now, with that being the desire and the mission, what's the reality?
Not all men are going to be saved.
Not everyone is going to be saved. And that while God desires for man to be saved, he is going to have to condemn. He is going to have to judge. If he's going to bless righteousness and if he's going to be just, that means he must condemn the wicked. But if we can state it this way, that's not his primary mission. His goal is to save those that will believe. And his goal is to help people to be able to see. But to those that will not believe, that will not see, he will judge and he will condemn. It's just simply a consequence. There has to be punishment. A law without punishment is not a law. And thus he's showing once again what his purpose is, that they which see not might see. That's what he's coming to do. But a consequence of what he is coming to do is going to produce some negative. And the negative is that they which see might be made blind. It takes both. You're going to have both. You're going to have the saved and you're going to have the lost. For the saved, okay, it's blessings and redemption. For the lost, it's condemnation and punishment.
We can see that with Noah and the ark.
Yeah.
The flood came, saved some, the flood came and destroyed the wicked. So how would you say that? The same entity saved one and destroyed the other.
Right. But what was his desire for everyone?
He wanted everybody to be saved.
He wanted everybody. That's why you have Noah called a preacher of righteousness and building of the ark. That's giving everybody time to repent and follow. But if you're not going to do it, you're not going to do it. And you can only hold off punishment for so long. So we have been presented to us a balance to the character of God. And that even when it comes to the destruction, who is it in the Old Testament? Is it Ezekiel? Is it Ezekiel 18 in that same context where it makes mention of the fact that God is not rejoicing when the wicked are destroyed? Seems like it is. And that even in the Proverbs, you have the same type of communication being given, that you do not relish, that you're not overjoyed when the wicked are overcome. And that's even the message of, it's an overlooked Old Testament prophet just because of how short it is. Obadiah. The condemnation that he lays, can't remember who his audience is, it's either Judah or Israel. The condemnation that he lays at their feet is the fact that when Edom was punished, that they were overjoyed in Edom's punishment. And if you remember anything about Edom, Edom is Esau. Edom was terrible to Israel. And that when we're considering God's justice being brought upon Edom, and the whole situation is, Edom had their houses in the mountains, and they were extremely prideful, and that they couldn't be reached, and that they couldn't be touched. And God brought the mountain down on them. Well, okay, we would look at that and we would say, all right, it's what you deserve. That's what you get. But even with all the terrible things that Edom did, Edom was still family. And that is just, all right, this is God's justice, but man, I'm sad that it happened. That it had to happen. And that's a fine line that we have to walk. And the reason why we have to walk that fine line is because, and that's the message that Obadiah is bringing to either Israel or Judah, is because what happened to these people, it can happen to you. So it's like when two siblings are bickering, they're fighting, and one of them ends up getting in trouble, and the other one wants to be in the other room laughing that the other one got in trouble, it's usually a good practice to go ahead and spank the other one that's laughing. You don't need to laugh. You don't need to make fun when your sibling's getting in trouble. I'm not sure how we got there. Anyways, good point. Need to be said. Can't remember the connection. Verse 40. Some of the Pharisees which were with him heard these words and said unto him, Are we blind also? So here they feel the thrust of what Jesus said. And they're asking, was he talking about us? Obviously he's talking about you. Of course he is. Here are all these things that you should be seeing, and you do not want to see it. Yes, you are too blind to see these things. But as we mentioned, what we're doing, we're referencing something deeper than just blind sight, physical sight and blindness. They are lacking the proper attitude to believe these things. You cannot, and just what we're being shown, you cannot convert people like this. They're not going to see it. They're not going to see it. And you could present the Bible to them till you're blue in the face. And they're just not going to take it. And simply because they do not want to. It takes understanding, knowledge, but being honest with that knowledge for one to be converted. For some, Christ will be light to give this understanding. To others, he is the deepening of darkness to not comprehend. And that's simply they are just going to resist. Jesus said unto them, if ye were blind, ye should have no sin. But now you say, we see, therefore your sins remain. If you were blind like this man, admitting that you did not know, that you needed light and that you needed help, well, Jesus can teach that person. But you say, oh, no. We see everything. Or we know everything. And I cannot, and if that's the kind of person that you are, then okay, I can't teach you anything. And so you're going to remain in your sins. And just think about, here we are on another Sunday, and how many people all around us will be getting together, and they'll have different sections of their Bible being read to them, and yet never see and understand what it teaches. What it says about the church. What it teaches about the church. There is one true church that Jesus built. It has one form of teaching, has one form of structure, organization, has one form of leadership. And you'll have people, they'll read those verses and it doesn't do anything to them. Spiritual blindness. How you can have people read Mark 16:16, he that believeth and is baptized shall be saved, and he that believeth not shall be damned, and they'll come up with all kinds of excuses to not do what this says. They can read it and read it and read it and never see it. It's because they don't want to. But then even for us, as being Christians, and the recognition that we have Christian responsibilities that we're supposed to be doing and we're supposed to be upholding. Colossians 3:5, mortify therefore your members which are upon the earth, fornication, uncleanness, inordinate affection, evil concupiscence, and covetousness, which is idolatry. And think about our own brethren reading scriptures like this about our own responsibilities and they don't follow it. What has happened? It's blindness. This is not just a people in the world problem. This is an everybody problem. And even though chapter 9 closes here, we have no break in our subject matter when we get to chapter 10 to where Jesus starts discussing about the shepherd. That in fact it all connects directly into line because a shepherd is supposed to lead. And here are these Pharisees supposed to be the leaders, and Jesus is calling them blind. Well, according to Matthew 15, what happens to blind leaders? Huh?
The blind leaders leading the blind.
Okay. And what happens?
Yeah, they're going to fall into a pit.
Jesus describes them as blind leaders of the blind, and that both are going to fall into the ditch. What we're going to have is a shift and a contrast. Here he is depicting their leadership at this time. They're blind, they don't know where they're heading, and they're taking you with them. But then there's this other leader. This other person giving guidance and direction. And he knows where he's going. But in going that way, you have to admit some things. He sees all. There's not anything hidden from him. And Isaiah describes the way in which he is going, in which he's leading people, as being a highway, which is the highway of righteousness. And Isaiah describes it in such a way that, you don't just stumble upon this highway. You don't accidentally just look up and say, oh, I'm here. It's a set way that has to be chosen to be taken. So we'll pick up with some introduction into chapter 10. I was kind of hoping we get into it today because my sermon's coming from chapter 10, but I think we'll be okay without it. So any thoughts or questions on chapter 9?
Well, the thing that's going through my mind, and this is not to take away the weightier matters of what Jesus is trying to teach us, but all of this takes place, within half an hour of them trying to stone him and him fleeing away from that, healing a blind man and coming back to save the blind man and still trying to teach the people trying to stone him.
Yeah.
So,
And that's a point that doesn't need to be lost on us, because we are being shown just how many times God will come along and try to help these people. And even with the Pharisees, it's a situation of, okay, I know I'm not going to help you, but I can use you to help somebody else. And that we might, look at the situation, why are you wasting your time with the Pharisees? It's not about the Pharisees. It's about this blind man. And anybody else that is surrounding the situation that might be watching and listening in. Yeah, I don't want the Pharisees to be lost, but I'm not just focusing on the Pharisees. It's everybody else that's in the situation. And so just as Jamie mentioned, it's like all of this is circulating around the temple. I mean, this is God's house, His place of mercy, supposed to be His place of healing and recovery. And Jesus does that for this blind man. And He's still trying to do it for Israel, in that, as Jamie mentioned in chapter 10, okay, we're right back to trying to teach the people that were just trying to stone you. So that's a good point. And it's just that long suffering. Attitude and character being revealed before their very eyes, but they don't appreciate it. So good point. That definitely needs to be stated and not lost on us. All right, anything else?